Hello and welcome. I'm Nate Klauser, a member of the steering committee of Our Revolution Somerville and a co-chair of ORS's electoral working group. I'm pleased to welcome the candidates, ORS members.
I'm Nate Klauser, a member of the...
Sorry about that. The candidates, ORS members, and members of the public to this forum for the candidates seeking ORS's endorsement in their run for Ward City Councilor this year. This is the third of 4 municipal candidate forums ORS is hosting this week. These forums are being held on Zoom and are also being live streamed to the ORS YouTube channel, where they will remain available for after the fact viewing. Since 2016, Our Revolution Somerville's mission has been to transform politics in Somerville and to advance a broad progressive agenda in the city. We invited candidates running for Somerville Mayor, City Council, and School Committee this year to apply for endorsement by completing our candidate questionnaire by June 7th. Candidate questionnaire responses can now be found on our website at the link that I'm dropping into the chat now. This forum is the next step in our endorsement process, where our members and the public have an opportunity to hear more from the candidates about themselves and their campaigns. Then later this month, our members will vote on whether and which candidates to endorse in this year's municipal elections. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to this evening's moderator, Frank Lee, to explain the rules and kick things off.
Great. Thanks, Nate. Hi, I'm Frank Lee. I'm a former member of the steering committee of Our Revolution Somerville and a current member of ORS's housing and electoral working groups, and also your moderator for this evening's forum. So we'll begin in a moment with candidate opening statements. These statements and all of your question responses this evening will be limited to 90 seconds in length. To give you an idea of how much time you have left to speak, our timekeeper will hold up a green sheet of paper when you have 60 seconds left, a yellow sheet of paper when you have 30 seconds left, and a red sheet of paper when you have 5 seconds left. Then, when your time expires, if you are still speaking, your audio will be muted, and I will move on to the next candidate. All of the questions that will be asked tonight were prepared in advance by Our Revolution Somerville's electoral working group, with input from ORS members and coalition partner organizations. So the candidates were provided the question topics in advance. They have not seen the questions themselves prior to tonight's event. We ask that the candidates respect these rules, the moderator, and each other as this forum progresses. Please speak only when called upon. Please do not interrupt one another or the moderator. And please do your best to stay within the time limit so that we can hear your entire response. ORS thanks the candidates for filling out our questionnaire and appreciates you all taking the time to join us this evening. With all that out of the way, let's begin with the candidates' opening statements. For these statements, we'll proceed in numerical order by ward, and within each ward, we'll proceed in alphabetical order by last name. For subsequent questions, we'll keep the same general order, but stagger which ward goes first. So for opening statements, we'll start with Ward 1. Matt McLaughlin, you have 90 seconds.
All right, gotta get unmuted. Start with the best ward. Thank you very much. Matt McLaughlin, Ward 1 City Councilor and City Council President. Thank you all very much for considering me. I am running unopposed this year, but I would appreciate the support of Our Revolution. And no matter what happens this election cycle, I will be the longest tenured City Councilor on the City Council next year. So I have a lot of experience about what we can and can't do as a city council, the limits of power, and the power that we sometimes neglect. And I would just like to talk, I know we're gonna get into issues, but I'm an issues-oriented person. And the two things that I really wanna focus on for the rest of this term and next term is one, charter reform, which I'm sure everyone's aware of, so that we can actually do the things that we all say that we wanna do. We need to expand the power of the city council, limit the power of the executive branch in order to do the things we'd like to do. But there's another issue really close to my heart that's not on the ORS questionnaire. It's most likely not on any candidates' literature. And it's something that we have absolute power as the city council to do. And that's to increase housing along transit lines in Somerville. The Green Line is coming to Somerville, and it's guaranteed to displace a lot of people. And the only thing that we have absolute power on, the one thing that we haven't gotten to yet as a city council, is increasing density and increasing affordable housing along these transit zones. So that's going to be a big mission for me. And I'm not only asking for your support for re-election, I'm asking for your support as a movement to make that issue happen and to make charter reform happen as well. Our revolution started 4 years ago. I was there for its inception. And since then, we haven't just decided.
Oh, JT, you're up next.
All right, thanks. Hello, everybody. I'm JT Scott, Ward 2 City Councilor. I have to disagree. Ward 2 is definitely the best ward. But I am here and very excited to be part of the Our Revolution endorsement process. Like Councilor McLaughlin, I was there at the inception of Our Revolution and ran initially as a movement candidate. And one thing that I'm so proud of is the work that's been done to this point. And there is so much more work to be done. I'd say it's not even just enough to be increasing housing density near transit, because that certainly is the case in Ward 2, but we have to be focusing on the creation of public housing for our broad network of residents, and using housing as a tool towards policy goals, including increasing diversity of hiring in our schools and making our public services more of a home, and to ensure that the people who do serve the city can have a home here. So, I've been proud to work with the movement for the last 4 years in office. I do have an opponent this year, and so I am asking for your vote, for the endorsement, and for your support to continue this fight on and to continue to push this movement as we push the city forward in every direction. So thank you very much, and I hope I have your support.
All right, Ben, you're up next.
Hey everybody, I'm Ben Ewan-Campen. I'm the Ward 3 City Councilor. I was elected in 2017 and I'm running unopposed for a third term. So I was thinking earlier about what to say tonight. And I started thinking about the first ever Our Revolution public meeting back in 2017. And as a matter of fact, in the aftermath of the Bernie 2016 campaign, I was one of the first volunteers with a lot of people I recognize here tonight that started organizing with Our Revolution. And one of my first tasks was to put together that first meeting in the East Somerville cafeteria, along with Tessa Bridge, one of my fellow candidates. And the reason I bring up that meeting is because Councilor Matt McLaughlin gave a speech that night that I still remember. And he started by saying, here we are in progressive, democratic Massachusetts, and we like to focus on all the things that we are best at. We have some of the best schools in the country. We have some of the best hospitals, companies, whatever. But the fact of the matter is that we are also leaders when it comes to inequality. And he had this whole list of statistics where Massachusetts is one of the worst states for income inequality, for racial segregation, for educational inequalities, so on, so on, so on. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because I think that exactly summarizes what motivates me in politics. Somerville is, like a lot of cities, we are doing incredibly well for the people who are doing well. And then there is this vast inequality. And all of what we are trying to do is address that inequality through legislation, through advocacy, through supporting community and movement organizing, and building up a local movement that can push for statewide changes.
All right, Jesse, you're next.
Thank you. Hi, Jesse Klingon, Ward 4 City Councilor. I'm also unopposed for my third term. I ran in 2017 as part of that movement that everybody talks about. As it came out of the Bernie campaign, I was so proud to be part of our revolution before ultimately seeking their endorsement and receiving it in 2017. And I think, I embody the values of our revolution, and it's a working class movement. I am somebody who is in a union. I'm a mill clerk 3 for the state of Massachusetts, and I'm also a city councilor. I've been, grew up in this city. I've seen the system inside and out. My mom was a foster parent. It's nothing for me to, I don't talk about, the unvoiced here in Somerville. I I walked amongst them because these are the people I know from growing up here. And so I'm seeking our revolution's endorsement again because I'd be proud to have it. And I think that we want to continue this movement, this working class movement, giving a voice to people who have been there and walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And so that, I hope you'll consider endorsing me. And that's it.
Okay, Tessa.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Tessa.
Sorry, I went the wrong order. Sorry. I think it's just Jess. Wait a minute. I think Jesse. Oh, sorry. You were yes, Tessa. You're correct. Sorry, I got mixed up.
That's okay. We're good.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Tessa Bridge, and I'm running for City Council in Ward 5. I'm so honored and excited to be here with all of you tonight. I also went down memory lane planning for this. 5 years ago, I attended the initial meeting at the Visiting Nurse Assisted Living Community to imagine what an Our Revolution Somerville chapter might be. The next year, I was elected to the founding steering committee of ORS, and now I'm standing before you as a candidate for City Council. And I'm not seeking to leverage your power to get into office, but rather I'm running for office because of the power that we have built together. I'm really proud of what we've done, and I'm so excited about the future possibilities. There are many wonderful things about Somerville, and the city is not working for everyone. We have an essential question in front of us. What kind of community do we want to be, and who gets to decide that? To become an equitable, sustainable, and healthy community for all, we must name the ways that power and privilege shape our policies and practices and deeply engage with parts of our community that have not had voice in decision-making. I have done this as a racial justice organizer in Cambridge Public Schools, with ORS, fighting for a living wage for paraprofessionals with the SEU, and on Erica Eiderhoven's campaign. I have consistently fought for justice, stood up to power, and organized to build grassroots power, all through the lens of democratic socialism. This is much bigger than me. It's about our movement. I am proud to have advocated for justice alongside you all, and I will continue to fight with you as city councilor for our shared vision of what Somerville can be.
Right, and next is Beatrice.
Good evening. My name is Beatriz Gomez Moca, and I'm running for City Council Ward 5, and I'm excited for the opportunity to participate in this forum. I'm a native of Puerto Rico, an 18-year Somerville resident with two beautiful children, Isabela and Marco, who attend Somerville Public Schools. I come from a diverse family. My mother and father were educators, a chemistry high school teacher and a university physicist, respectively. They taught me that knowledge and hard work are the path for better opportunities. My abuelo paterno was a doctor who had to travel to Mexico for a medical degree when he was denied the opportunity in the US. My abuelo materno, the son of Syrian immigrants, came to Puerto Rico to work in the garment industry and only had an 8th grade education. My abuela materna was a seamstress with only high school education. She would sew dresses for the affluent in exchange for fabric for her own clothes during her elementary school years. The stories of my family reinforce my belief in equally including and addressing the needs of all in our society. I know that Somerville aspires to be an equitable and sustainable city that is inclusive and welcoming of all people. COVID showed us that inequity still exists. I believe to have a more just and equitable Somerville, we need to recognize those inequities and work on breaking barriers. As a Puerto Rican woman who's bilingual and bicultural, I'm keenly aware of the injustices and biases that happen due to a lack of understanding. Our local institutions need to recognize language and cultural differences to have a more inclusive community that is equally accessible to all. I thank our Revolution Somerville for highlighting many issues that are important to achieving those aims. And I'm honored to taking part in this forum, and I hope to earn your support.
Lance, you're next.
Okay, thanks, Frank. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for putting this all together. I am running unopposed for what will be my 4th term, and I am just so happy to have you all here and to have this process continuing. I remember that night in 2017, I was doing GeoTV for Matt down in Ward 1, and I remember being in his living room when we started getting the calls in, and just thinking how incredibly different it's going to be after having fighting for 2 years to make any little changes that we can. And we made some pretty big changes, even with the old crew, but with this new group that came in 4 years ago, it just meant that we could accomplish so many more things. And for me, I'm the person that I always am much more comfortable in the back with a pencil, making the changes, writing writing the laws, writing the ordinances, figuring out how we can get through legal challenges and just sort of the dirty work. And it was so great to have these incredibly dynamic new colleagues that could help me on that, and also lead the way and provide the voice that we all we're trying to amplify in the community. So it's been great to have these folks along. It's been I've been really honored. New board, one way or the other, board council, one way or the other, and I can't so much that we still have to do. I won't repeat all the things that folks have already mentioned, because as you all know, I'm standing right there with you, trying to get more housing, more affordable housing. And
Okay, and next up is Alex Anderson.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me and organizing this event today. I'm very excited to participate. My name is Alex Anderson. I'm running for City Council in Ward 7, which I will say is the best in the West of the city in terms of wards. I think, Matt, you can keep it in the East, and Scott and JT Scott, you can keep it over just the West of East. You guys can all keep the middle. So I am coming to this position after living 8 years in Ward 7 and being very active and working directly with the city on making our streets and sidewalks safer for people. My background is in economics, and for the last 10 years, I've been applying that background in the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, which is a not-for-profit that studies healthcare systems. It was founded by 2014 Democratic governor challenger Don Berwick. And so in that work, I've really focused on systems thinking and how do we understand disparate systems with complex stakeholders and find workable solutions for folks. In that work, I founded our racial justice, diversity, and inclusion work, where I redesigned our hiring system and actually took a systems approach to understanding inequities that exist through recruitment, through the employee experience, to actually take an anti-racism lens and apply practical solutions to finding things that can work for people. I'm running for city council because our streets are an intersection of environmental justice, of affordability for our housing, of safety in the immediate term, and of just access to our neighborhood. And the city council has a lot of influence on how the streets play out. And I've had the experience working with the city on how we can fix our streets. And that's a starting place if we want our city to work for everybody for the long run. So I'm looking forward to learning more about all of you and for all of you to learn more about me. Thanks a lot.
All right, next up is Becca Miller.
Hey all, happy Friday. My name is Becca Miller, and I grew up in Massachusetts in a Jewish congregation and a family where Tikkun Olam, or to heal the world, was taught as a core tenet. To me, healing the world means that we each have a responsibility to one another to take steps to build our communities and fight for the world we deserve. For the last 5 years, I've called Somerville home and built a community here. Like the majority of Ward 7 residents, I'm a renter. I work every day to build food security with low-income families at my day job, where I manage a campaign to increase state funding for a program that helps folks with SNAP get extra money to buy local produce directly from local farmers. We've won more than $34 million from the state in 4 years, and it's really built me up as an organizer and brought more advocates into the policy process. Through my work, I've actually had to build consensus around our shared values to pass policy year after year. I've also been a member of DSA for 3 years, organizing locally and nationally on the steering committee of the Eco-Socialism Working Group. I'm proud to have helped set up our Green New Deal and PROACT campaign, which flipped 2 sitting US senators, including Joe Manchin. I'm running for city council because I want to help change the status quo and build a community that works for all of us. Somerville has a progressive reputation, but we are just as in need of deep conversations around racial equity and justice as is every other community. My principles are to act with transparency, with accountability, and with accessibility. I pledge to hold these principles close when elected, hold regular office hours, and keep my constituents up to date on the latest goings on from City Hall. I believe we need to do all the things that folks have already talked about with affordable housing, and I'm asking you to bring more people into politics and our movement into politics to get the wins we deserve.
All right, and then Judy Neufeld.
Thanks so much, Councilor McLaughlin. I believe the saying is save the best award for last. So my name is Judy Pineda-Neufeld, and I'm running for City Council in Ward 7. I'm a Mexican-American and Jewish woman and the proud daughter of 2 immigrant parents who raised me to honor and celebrate my roots. I've been inspired by mi abuelita, who was born in Mexico City and raised 9 children with love, strength, and compassion. And my nanny, who spent her teenage years in hiding during the Holocaust, keeping her siblings safe while the world outside was at war. Passion and persistence, I think, is just a part of my DNA. I'm running for city council because this moment demands bold leadership, and the neighborhoods of Ward 7 deserve a city councilor with both the lived and professional experience to take action on our common challenges from day one. In the last year, with the city as the head of the Immigrant Services Unit under our COVID operations, I brought much needed resources to our immigrant neighbors during this time and during this crisis. Resources like rental assistance, food delivery, and much coveted vaccine appointments. As city councilor, I'll continue to amplify the voices of those most impacted. I'll fight for an equitable COVID-19 recovery plan that brings additional relief to small businesses and those still out of work. I'll fight for more affordable and accessible housing by passing a fair housing amendment, and will support the needs of the tenants of Clarendon Hill during its redevelopment. And I'll pursue policies for safer walking, biking, and transit access for all, including fare-free buses. Fighting for equitable access isn't just a buzzword for me. It's the way I lead. And I'm looking forward to bringing this perspective to the Somerville City Council. Thank you.
Okay, so we start with the questions for all candidates. Our first question is on the topic of policing and public safety. What do you believe is the social function of policing in the present day? What role do you think it should have in the future, if any? We'll start with JT Scott.
All right, thanks. I mean, the purpose of policing as an institution in the present day is a consistent through line from Boston's first slave patrols in 1636 to the first formal police department that was formed in the country in Boston in 1838. It's about the control and protection of private property. And that through line continues through the Haymarket riot in 1886, where police killed workers who were on strike calling for the radical reform of an 8-hour workday. That's the institution. And I think what it can be, right, as we work towards, we need to work towards a world where that primacy of the protection of property is not our main priority, that it's about people, right? People over profits, people over property, people first. And so we need to be investing in services that actually benefit the public welfare, the public health. And that's going to take time, and we are going to need to reform our way towards it. We are going to need to transfer funding to get there, and we're going to have to do that in partnership with everybody in the community. But fundamentally, that institution's main goal has to change. And so we have to change that institution to do that. Thanks.
All right, next is Ben Ewenkampen.
Before I get to the big picture, I just want to mention briefly some of the work that we've done over the last 2 terms around policing, around criminal justice. So I introduced a ban on facial recognition. I introduced a much broader surveillance oversight policy, and recently passed a ban on tear gas and other chemical and non-lethal weapons. And the idea with all of these is to bring the decision-making that law enforcement and the city government makes out of kind of a behind closed doors, this is the policy and we're just going to implement it, and bring that into the light for the public to be aware of. We've changed the confirmation process from what used to be a rubber stamp for promotion and hiring into an actual accountability mechanism. And in fact, this council has voted down a number of police promotions, to my knowledge, the first time in the state. And a number of other things that my fellow councilors have introduced that I'll let them talk about. Big picture, I believe that our police department spends the vast majority of their time dealing with issues that many people in the community don't believe require a police response. And in fact, I believe many officers don't believe is the best use of their time. I believe we need to make a new non-police agency that addresses many of the non-violent, non-criminal emergencies in the community, things that police are not necessarily best trained for. And I think that for law enforcement, there needs to be very robust civilian oversight. And those are all things I'll be working on.
All right, so next is Jesse.
Thank you. So I believe the role of police in society is to enforce the laws of the land, the laws that we put on the books. I believe that if you don't have laws, you have chaos. I grew up in a city where many of my friends were on the other side of that law, and I know the nature of of what humans can be and can do. And I think that's the main function for police. Now, I think what's become of policing is something, as my colleague, as Ben Campion said, has become basically a catch-all. You know, you have, and it has a lot to do with the folks in your community, in your society. Like calling 911 is easy. They call 911 and then they brush their hands of it. I did my job. And then these, armed people show up. Ultimately, I think we need to come up with an alternative to those situations where if somebody, looks suspicious in your neighborhood or something, like you're not, calling in the police. I think that maybe that speaks to maybe the person's own sort of inclinations towards, their fears. And so ultimately, I do think there's an alternative to having police go out. So the police function is to carry out, enforce the laws. And I think that now it's become more of a customer service catch-all where somebody calls and they essentially, the police come out and, at that point, anything can happen. You really, when you.
All right, so next is Tessa Bridge.
All right, thanks. So I totally agree with what a number of the folks have already said here. JT, thank you for the walk through our history. Those roots are so important to keep front and center as we think about policing. And Jesse, I really appreciate your framing of policing as a catch-all, because that's absolutely what I believe as well. We're using policing to sort of solve all of our societal ills right now. The majority of engagement with policing are not due to violent crimes, but are related to mental illness, poverty, or addiction. And since we don't invest in care for people, we end up sending the police to support individuals in crisis rather than having a service-based model that addresses the root cause of the problem. And we know that there are other ways to do this. We've seen other communities put other programs into practice, and we can do that here in Somerville. And those programs that are, wellness-based can respond immediately and effectively, which I know is a large concern that others have brought up. So there's a very small number of instances where there are violent and dangerous situations unfolding. In those instances, I think having a much smaller and more focused police force who can respond is a good idea, but the vast majority of cases we can take out of the police department. And we have to consider the structural consequences of investing in policing over in other options. So I'm knocking doors every week, multiple times a week, talking to residents in our community. I'm hearing so many needs in the community. Most people I talk to have no problem with the idea of defunding the police or are excited about it. And what they really want is funding going into the services that they need. And we can do that if we think about how we distribute our resources as a community and really focus on providing the proactive and wellness-based.
Right. And next up is Beatrice.
It's Beatrice, please. To talk about the social function of policing, I think we need to talk about what's happening now. Our police are responding to failures in our society to provide quality healthcare, quality housing, and quality education. I think we all agree we need to do better and put more resources towards those important goals. Due to the failures of society, police sometimes becomes de facto social workers, teachers, drug counselors, and even parents. It's time we address the role of our police that forces on police inequality and dysfunction in our society. Last June, after my uncle who lives in Minnesota after his first suicide attempt, first responders who included the police injured his arm, rendering him unable to use it. Part of that injury set him into a further severe depression that led to a deadly suicide attempt in the fall. Could a more trained first responder team have been able to better handle a fit of depression that turned into violence? Probably yes. I want to make clear, Somerville Police under the current budget have functions done by non-police officers. The current police budget includes our school crossing guards. We assign crossing guards and not police because we know they can do a better job. I think we agree we're trying to do the same with other functions of police. As a first step to reform police and determine relocation of funds, I would begin declaring drugs a healthcare issue and not a criminal offense that should be handled by healthcare and social workers. Portugal turned around their drug problems by a policy change such as this, and today has the lowest rates of fatality overdoses in Western Europe. Today, the US has 70,000 deaths due to drug overdoses.
And next is Lance Davis.
Okay, there we go. I'm out of purgatory. Thank you. So look, we all have heard that there is a significant agreement among just about everybody that police are doing are performing functions and playing roles that they ought not to be, that could be better performed by others. I have asked for increased investment in the budget for additional social workers, even now, right away, before we get through the entire reimagining policing piece. But I think what's important is the institution, as JT led off with, was built around a protection of property for folks that look like me, frankly. And we all agree that where we are right now is not the right place. But the question is, how are we going to get to something different? The mayor has proposed a reimagining policing process and including civilian oversight. Councilor Ewan Campen mentioned a bunch of the ordinances that we've already passed, and he helped me, I helped him put a lot of those in place. But we need to move forward and make sure that this administration and the next administration moves forward. We're now past a year since this conversation begun, and we're still sort of filling out the racial social justice department. We need to be moving faster, but we also need to recognize that this is a process that isn't going to look like any other process. So, to me, that's the most important thing, is making sure that we are doing this in a way that brings all the voices in.
All right, next is Alex Anderson.
Great. Thank you, everybody. So again, Alex Anderson for Ward 7, and I agree with much of what has been said here. I think that the conversation around policing in America is a long overdue conversation. One of the longest standing institutions that has the most obvious and immediately emergent impacts on community colors, especially the Black community in the United States. And I think that we're no different in that regard in terms of the disparate impact of communities of color in our communities, of women in our communities, of people living on low and middle incomes in our communities. That's the reality of systems that are designed, as Lance said, to protect folks like me, white men in America. And so when I say I'm a systems thinker, what I want to know is I want to understand the systems at play, understand the stakeholders, understand the data, and then start making decisions so we can ensure we have the right services at the right times in the right place performed by the right people. That means having public health professionals responding to public health things. That means having social workers responding to social health things. That means having people who are trained to prevent or respond to violent interactions, responding to violent interactions. Fortunately, in Somerville, our crime rates are very manageable. Our violent crime rate is incredibly low. What we need to understand is how are our police working with our community on everything else? And an important piece of that conversation is understanding our role, non-policing's role. At the end of the day, the police are enforcing laws that city councils pass. They are enforcing laws that states pass. They are reflecting the will of the people. And we have to open that conversation to understand our role in the disparate impact of policing. And that's where I want the conversation to go.
And Becca Miller, you're next.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'd agree with a lot of the folks who have said before about the police being a catch-all bucket for everything that is deemed wrong or criminal in our society today. We have had this conversation about reimagining police for the last year, and really little change has been brought from it. So I think we need to keep pushing for change and to hold the mayor and the administration accountable to the community's demand for the reallocation of funds from police into life-affirming services, right? I think it was a finance committee meeting within the last week where the police chief presented about the majority of calls to the department. And it was really to service a couple hundred members of our community. So I think getting services to those members of our community, instead of repeatedly harassing them, is what I would like to see. If they need mental health support, if they need housing, if they need help with food security, that's something that we should be focusing on. In the future, I think doing all we can to reduce our reliance on police as this catch-all bucket for nonviolent situations and reinvesting in community response and mental health services and social services would be where I would like to see us go. And so therefore, I'd like to see, some responsibilities moved out of the police into social services, and the police focused on a more just direct response to violent situations, which we have very few of in Somerville. And I think that, we talk about not being able to reallocate funding until new programs are being built up. But right now, we're experiencing, sorry, our communities experiencing violence when we experience hunger, or I think we could just be more focused on those programs and building them up. So.
Judy Neufeld, you're next.
Thanks. Let me first express my condolences to Beatrice for your uncle and your Theo. I too have lost loved ones to suicide, so I'm sorry for your loss. So back to the function of policing. We know nationally and here in Somerville, the spending on law enforcement dramatically outpaces spending on education, mental health programs, violence prevention, housing programs, all the resources we need to build healthier communities. Police, as we've heard already tonight, have become the default first responders when someone's in crisis. But there are a lot of emergency calls that don't require an armed law enforcement response. Calls like mental health needs, substance abuse, health or wellness checks, or homelessness prevention can all be diverted to social workers and mental health providers or community health workers that are frankly just better suited to handle them. I personally support the ACEs bill at the State House, which stands for Alternatives for Community Emergency Services, which is sponsored by Senator Chang Diaz and Representative Sabadosa. And the bill would help increase the availability of these non-law enforcement and unarmed community-based emergency response options for calls to 911. So I'm looking forward to working with our state delegation to get this bill passed and bring these resources to Somerville directly. In the meantime, I would be leading the efforts for us to begin implementing these changes immediately in the city.
And Matt McLaughlin.
I would say the ultimate responsibility for police should be to protect victims. And as somebody, as an elected official, I try to represent victims, not institutions. I got my start in Somerville politics representing young people who are being harassed by police at playgrounds and being forced out of neighborhoods because their white neighbors who consider themselves liberal call the cops on them. And this is the function that they served in that time. There are also victims of police violence. There's victims of other violence as well, gun crimes, domestic abuse, and yes, including theft. A lot of these problems still exist in the city. They're limited to very specific groups. So while the crime is low, the people are being disproportionately impacted by these crimes. But I encourage people not to listen to me at all. I'm a white man. I'm an elected official. I'm a large person. I can defend myself. I'm going to be just fine. I would like Our Revolution, DSA, all these groups are doing great organizing work, to go and listen to the victims of these crimes and ask them what they would like to see for the future of policing in Somerville. But they're not hard to find. Go to the Mystics, go to Clarendon Hill, go to East Somerville, Winter Hill, go to the homeless shelters. Ask them what they'd like to see for the future of policing in Somerville. And if they disagree with you, don't dismiss those disagreements. They might have a different lived experience.
Okay, thank you all. The next topic is on housing. The question is, what municipal tools would you use to address the housing crisis, especially for low-income residents, families, and those with accessibility limitations? In particular, would you support increasing the percentage of family units and 30 to 50% AMI affordable units in inclusionary zoning requirements? A requirement for developers to create workforce housing, and increasing linkage fees on developers. Ben Ewenkampen.
Thank you very much. Yes, so the housing crisis is without question the number one focus that myself and I believe the rest of the council has focused on. And it's one of these incredibly best of times, worst of times, frustrating situations where I think that this city council has passed probably the strongest set of municipal housing bills of any city in the state. And yet the housing crisis remains completely out of control. And it feels like everything we're doing is, just clawing at sand. So my top priority for the last term was passing the affordable housing overlay, which makes it easier to build affordable housing, and it makes it harder for people who don't like affordable housing to stop it. And my top priority for this coming term is what we're calling the Fair Housing Amendment. This was inspired by work from Councilor Lydia Edwards in Boston. And the idea is to take a lot of the specific ideas that you're talking about right there and put them on a menu. And when developers go for their permits, the same way that they would be reviewed for environmental impacts, transportation impacts, that there would be an affirmative addressing fair housing issue, and that would allow individual developers to take items off that menu that might have to do with accessibility, deeper affordability, family units, who they're marketing to, Section 8, things like that, so that there are multiple paths forward. And that's kind of the top zoning priority that I have for this term.
Thanks, Ben. Next up is Jesse Klingon.
Thank you. So yeah, as far as municipal tools, as Councilor Ewan Campen said, I mean, I think we've leveraged, quite a few, and of course, we're pretty tied by the state as to just how far we can go. But as far as, I mean, obviously, the main thing is to build more affordable housing, and find funding sources for that. So that's through those fees, as you mentioned, with developers. Kicking in a little more so we can build some more affordable housing, but we also need land to do that. So I'm supporting the Community Land Trust for that reason. I support even going up to 25% for affordable housing. As Ben Ewan Campen said, we've been doing a lot. We look at things like universal wait lists so that people don't have to keep filling things out. So that we can, keep people in the city who want to stay in the city. But adding to the housing stock, barring rent control, which I'm in favor of, which is, it's a heavy lift, and a lot of people are working on it. And but barring that, I think that we have to just keep pushing developers. Keep making making rules and laws that when they build, the requirements are. Increase the requirements, increase the linkage fees, and use that money to build affordable housing, and just keep working with SCC to expand their portfolio.
Thanks, Jesse. Tessa Bridge.
All right. Yeah, this is, as some other folks have said, the number one issue I hear from residents as I'm talking to folks at doors. Housing is a huge, very present, ongoing anxiety and concern for many, many people living in our community, and we have to do everything we can to address it. I think number one, we need to build on the existing progressive affordable housing policies that several folks have mentioned here tonight, which includes increasing the percentage of affordable housing in new development, particularly for families. We need to focus on transit-oriented housing and increasing density around T-stops. We need to continue to support the Community Land Trust to actually purchase more land and bring it into the social domain, so that more land in our city is publicly held and we can build more social, mixed income social housing on that land, including for municipal employees, so we can support people who work in our community to live in our community. We need to expand our housing stabilization services, which means moving more money into the Office of Sustainable Housing. We need to work with tenants unions to build stronger tenant protections. We need to make sure that we have affordable and accessible units, so that folks who do have disabilities have access to affordable housing. And we need to make sure that all of our housing policies are centering BIPOC communities and those who've been impacted by housing injustices such as redlining, predatory lending, housing bias, and discrimination. So we really need to take all of these approaches solution, but I really think this is a place that we need to be directly investing as a community into increasing our affordable housing for everyone.
Thank you, Tessa. Next is Beatriz Gomez.
So I want to start by saying what the challenge of housing in our country, and that it's seen as an earned right. But how can portions of our society who are low income afford a home when housing costs have gone up exponentially? We're talking $500 a square foot, and wages haven't gone up at the same rate. We need to address this injustice, and we learned with COVID housing conditions can impact the health and well-being of people. I can support the consideration of any policy that will provide better access to our citizens for a quality home. A supermarket worker, a line cook have the same right to a decent home than a lawyer or doctor do. I'm going to put on my architect and planner hat. I think we need to determine what is the best. In order to determine what is the best policy, we need to assess where is the greatest need for housing, understand the conditions of our existing stock, and understand what units are at risk of expiring use. During my 5 years working in affordable housing, I often found the biggest challenge was providing housing for the low income. That's 30% below median. That's a 20,000 to 30,000 range. I cannot tell you how many times I had to hang up the phone on low-income families looking for housing because the housing we were building was 50 to 60% of median income. This is heartbreaking. This is why we need to think it's important to assess where there's a need for housing and to determine the right policies and allocate the funds. And I also.
Thank you, Beatrice. Next is Lance Davis.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Look, let's start off by recognizing that we are not going to fix the affordable housing crisis, the housing affordability crisis in this city on our own. We can't, we don't have the tools, they don't exist. And that is primarily because the crisis itself is it's a regional and national issue for some of the reasons that folks have already mentioned. So what we need to focus on is doing every little thing we can, using every little tool we have and inventing more and newer tools to try and make the biggest difference we can. Because if we make a difference for one family or two family, that's worth all of the effort. So that having been said, when I ran in 2015, I ran on a platform of increase the inclusionary rate to 20%, not just in transit areas where the mayor proposed, but citywide. I did that on my first term. I ran on increasing the linkage fee and creating a first time ever jobs linkage fee. I did that in my first term. We now need to reassess both of those, as has been mentioned before. We need to look at where we can go further. We need to look at what's working and frankly, look at if there's anywhere that we screwed up in that, in those issues. Councilor Ewan Campen mentioned passing the affordable housing overlay. This is something that I pushed for and worked very hard for. I think it's not strong enough. I said that during the process. We had to make compromises just to get votes, even on this council, to get the right votes. I hope my colleagues in the next year will be willing to go further and be more aggressive. If you want to build affordable housing, build it. And we need to help you.
Thank you, Lance. Next is Alex Anderson.
Great, thanks. So yeah, I think like everybody else, I agree with a lot of what has been said. I think ultimately the affordability crisis in most cities, but especially in our city, is one of supply, right? There are not enough houses in Somerville to house everybody, right? We're at about 85,000 people right now as the 2020 census. You know, in the 50s and 60s, we were up to about 105, 110,000 residents, but there were a lot more people living per house in the 50s and 60s than are currently living in Somerville. So folks who are here, who want to stay here, who want to be invested in the community are getting priced out and having to move to other communities, and folks who want to join the community as workers, as people who want to raise their family, are not able to get in at all levels of income, but especially low incomes and especially low middle incomes. And so we need to have an approach to increase our housing supply while at the same time improving the housing supply for low and middle income workers in our community. And I think everything needs to be on the table. The city put up $50 million to have the Green Line extension come to town, and that money is hopefully coming back to the city. That's $50 million that the city could establish as 0% interest loans for low-income workers in our community. We need to be thinking about how can we create the line of financing for people to stay in our community and to join our community. And we have to think about increasing the supply, not just near our transit locations, but all across the city. And also, when we think about things like affordable housing and public housing, those don't need to just be massive buildings in specific locations. We need affordable housing dispersed throughout all of our units in our community.
Thanks, Alex. Next is Becca Miller.
Yeah, so like some others have already said, housing is the #1 issue I hear about on the doors while canvassing in my ward. So I support a lot of the things that folks have already talked about, like building housing along transit lines to increase our density, supporting our community land trust to purchase land that can be decommodified and create affordable home ownership opportunities, supporting the 100 Homes program, including through linkage fees, and increasing our affordable development rate to 25%. I think we need to just be really as aggressive as we possibly can be as a city council and really take a diversity of tactics. The work that the councilors have already done is a really great floor to build on. And I think, you know, our goal should eventually be to build mixed income social housing, right? Including housing for our municipal employees who currently have to drive into town and struggle to find parking, for teachers who work at the high school. As a former LaCourte tenant, I definitely support the tenants union in trying to build power with them to do what we can at the municipal level to hold those large landlords accountable and build with them at the state level to pass rent control, which vast majority of voters in Greater Boston support. Also in my ward, Tufts has been, not supporting their students with housing. So I would like them to build a high density dorm and support the Clarendon Hill residents as the redevelopment process begins. That's other issues that I think we need to be addressing here. And of course, creating a fair housing ordinance to address historic discrimination and making sure that we are doing all we can to have affordable housing in all of our neighborhoods would be great. We've also had some empty units in 2019, I believe, per the city's data, it was around 1,900 units. So incentivizing folks to fill those units would.
Thanks, Becca. Next is Judy Neufeld.
Frank. I do support increasing the percentage of family units and support creating more workforce housing and increasing linkage fees. But we also have to increase housing for the very low income residents. So those that fall below 30% AMI, which hasn't been mentioned yet. There's also more we can do to stem displacement. So things like passive fair housing amendment, which would amend the zoning code to require new development under review to consider impact on area residents that are historically discriminated against, as they would for environmental and parking impacts. We also need to focus on housing stability and keeping folks in their homes. So this includes extending our eviction moratorium, enacting a right to counsel program, and increasing our flexible rental relief funds. I'll share a quick story. In my work with the Immigrant Services Unit, we've been working with a resident who sublets her apartment. And she works at a Somerville restaurant. Like many people, her work was closed during COVID, so she fell behind on rent. But because she sublets her room, she doesn't qualify for a rental assistance program called RAFT. And the city is just out of flex relief funds. So we must increase our investment in flexible relief funds to help women like her stay in their home and make sure they don't get evicted and really invest in housing stability in the city as well.
Thank you, Judy. Matt McLaughlin.
Thank you. I support everything you're asking, and I support everything everyone here has said. But if we don't allow housing to get built, we're slicing a small pie into even smaller slices. We need to make this happen. The Green Line is coming. Boston Globe just ran an article the other day saying that the Green Line that was meant to help poor, low-income people is now exclusively going to benefit affluent people. We knew this was going to happen. That was the plan all along. And it's really insulting for someone like me who grew up seeing all my friends displaced by the red line, hear people act like this is a surprise. The only solution, well, there's many solutions, but the one solution we have absolute power over is to build housing by transit lines. We're not going to get anywhere if you can build a 5-story building in Sullivan Square, but you can only build a 3-story building in Ball Square that's getting its own Green Line station. We have the highest inclusionary rate in the state, 20%. That doesn't matter if you can't build up. And this isn't a radical plan. This isn't my genius strategy. Any city planner will tell you that this is what you have to do for the future of transit and housing in America. The fact that it hasn't happened yet is concerning to me. And it's not just old conservatives who are stopping this from happening. There's a lot of liberals who fear affordable housing as well. And we need to focus on the power we have to affect structural change. We will have that power next year.
Thanks, Matt. And JT Scott.
Sure, thanks. I agree to all of that. I'd say there's also 2 really important parts that are missing here. One of which is actually highlighted by the flexible funds that we have for our Office of Housing Stability. Good news, the eviction moratorium's already been extended for 3 months. Good news, we've already doubled the amount in the flex funds for next year's budget. But the flexibility that allows us to help undocumented residents here in Somerville, to help people that fall through the cracks of the RAF program, is exactly why we need to be devoting local funds towards creating public housing here in Somerville. And we have $50 million coming back from the Green Line. We have $70 million coming in just on the first tranche of these ARPA funds. We can leverage that with Somerville's very strong bond rating to do both a land acquisition at the cost of somewhere between $9 and $19 million an acre and actually build public housing that will serve all income levels, especially the very lowest. And because they're city funds, we can target those very specifically in ways that, frankly, Somerville Housing Authority can't, nobody can. And Somerville Housing Authority can't even build more units thanks to the Fair Club Amendment in 1998. So With that said, yes, building density is going to help, but one thing that being in Union Square has taught me is that if we're going to do that, we have to empower, create, and give more access and power to the neighborhood councils that are fighting for community benefits agreements, because those agreements can do things that no city government can around affordability, project labor agreements, and more. So we have.
Thank you, JT. Our next question is on the topic of development. Somerville has unparalleled value in its commercial and residential space. Yet we often hear the myth that if we ask too much from developers, they will decide to leave Somerville to develop elsewhere. What do you think the City Council should require from developers through legislation that truly impacts project finances and physical space? We'll start with Jesse Klingen.
Thank you. So, it is a delicate balance because, they'll never open their books and show us their pro formas. They always, it's always this sort of tug of war struggle. I actually wish that we had a way to sort of, show developers like, look, we ran them, this is doable. You can do this. I wish we had like a in-house department that could do that, because otherwise, it's just, they say, we say, so I think what the city could and should do is is to make sure that just ask for the most we can ask for. Just ask for. Land is at a premium, and sure, and we do. It is a delicate balance because we do want new development. We get a certain percentage of affordable housing out of it. We get there's certain benefits to it, but ultimately, we also lose valuable land that we're not going to get back that we could perhaps buy with the land trust. So I just think we really have to push for the maximum amount we can get out of those deals and be able to come at them with numbers and with figures and say, this is on this plot of land, this is doable. You can do this, and here's how. And let's work together to get a project that the community that benefits all of us.
Thanks, Jesse. Tessa Briggs, you're up.
Yeah. We are a thriving community that is highly desirable for developers. That is just the truth. And we need to be negotiating with developers from that position. We have to understand our value and our power in these negotiations. And we have to make sure that we're centering community. So as more and more developers are coming into our city, we need to protect our community and ensure that the developments that are happening are serving all of our best interests. We've seen in Union Square how powerful a CBA can be, and this needs to be a model across our community. And as a city councilor, I will support communities to negotiate with large developments. I think this is a really important role for city council to play. We need to make sure that we're pushing for developments to include green space. We need them to include affordable housing. We need them to be accessible. And we need to make sure that they're preserving and building into the fabric of neighborhoods. We also need to ensure that developers are paying their fair share by negotiating strong linkage fees, by negotiating fair pilot agreements so that we can do things like buy more land in the community land trust, build social housing, mixed income social housing for low income folks, as JT was just describing. We can provide these services that so many of our residents are asking for. This is a huge leverage point that we have, and I don't think we should be afraid to use it.
Thanks, Tessa. Next is Beatriz Gomez.
Yeah, so I have a lot of experience working in development in Cambridge and Boston. I know at one moment Somerville was not a desirable place to be, but that has changed. It is a desirable place to be. And I'm going to start with this concept. Construction has impact. And with construction, you always need to provide mitigation. That's what Boston requires. That's what Cambridge requires. Somerville is, I think, a little behind the times. I agree with Tessa. We need to provide mitigation for green spaces. We need to provide mitigation for transportation. We need to provide, require our new buildings to be net zero and not create a further impact. Remember, construction has impact. And the lesson is you need to ask for mitigation. Don't be shy.
Thank you, Beatrice. Next is Lance Davis.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, this is a tricky topic because all we hear from the administration, and to Councilor Klingen's point, we do have folks who can who can lay out what ought to work. But unfortunately, what we hear too often is it just happens to be exactly the thing that the developer is asking for. And I've never bought that. I've never believed it, and nor have many of my colleagues. And we have pushed back. And I've often said, if at some point someone isn't walking away, then you're not asking for enough. Take Union Square. I rewrote the offsite affordable housing provision to say that, look, if you're going to move the affordable housing from the building where it's required to somewhere else, then what you build somewhere else should have the exact same market value as what you would have built. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Well, the developers decided not to build it. Great, we still got the inclusionary housing, which is included in the building as it's supposed to be, but that's an example of push them as far as you think makes sense. And if they don't want to do it, fine. We'll take another route. The trick here is how you accomplish it, and using the tools that we have. I'm working on changes to the zoning that will allow density in direct exchange for those community benefits. Community benefits agreements are great. I support those, but they also have their limitations where we as the council can ordain these community benefits. We ought to use every tool we have to do that. It's one of the things I'm working on. It's one of the things that I hope to get in place in this next term. And it's just another way that we can make sure that the developers are giving us back their fair share for what they're getting.
Thanks, Lance. Next is Alex Anderson.
Thank you. So yeah, I think everything is on the table when it comes to development. I think we're in a really interesting situation in Somerville because of the amount of growth that has happened over the last 20 and 30 years. We have an entire population of people who live in Somerville, who have lived in Somerville their whole lives, who have invested in the community their whole lives, who have their largest financial asset in their house. And oftentimes the only people who can pay the top dollar for that asset are developers. And so we have a tricky thing to balance here of how do we protect working class people who have lived in Somerville for a very long time, while also incentivizing the right developments that we need to get a bigger housing supply. And so I really do think everything is on the table. On the transportation front, we know that parking minimums increase the price of any unit that is built. So we need to talk about what do we do with transportation and parking around any development that is done. And I'm in favor of making sure we're requiring developers when they're rebuilding sidewalks to make sure those are ADA compliant, make sure that there's no parking requirements for their buildings, to make sure that we're having money being invested into public transit access at major developments. And also when developments are being built, we need to incentivize affordable units within those buildings. And so the larger a building is, the more affordable units should be in that building. And if to Lance's point, if one person or one developer wants to step out because of that, there is always going to be another developer ready to step in and meet those demands. We have to have incentives and required percentages of the total cost of projects being sent to green spaces, being sent to environmental mitigation, being sent to public art to make our neighborhood work better for everybody.
Thanks, Alex. Becca Miller.
Yeah, so developers are just always going to be asking for the best deal for themselves. That's just capitalism as we know it, right? So we as a city council need to be willing to stand up and fight for what we deserve, right? The land is not going anywhere. It's our most valuable resource, and they will want to come back to it again and again. Like so many other folks have been saying, I think we need to fight for strong project labor agreements that ensure fair labor standards and local hires, and for strong community benefit agreements, which Union United has really demonstrated and has been a model for in this community and statewide. I obviously support higher linkage fees, pushing for strong community benefits and making sure our community can win those. So we need to, again, build up our organization and our movement to make those happen, and definitely support percentages of a project to invest in green space, in local arts, and in making units ADA compliant.
Thanks, Becca. Judy Neufeld.
Thanks, Frank. I agree. We have leverage as a city because it's such a desirable place to live. And so we should demand more from our developers. Here in this ward, there's a sort of interesting conversation. A building that has which is a big restaurant at the heart of the square. It's a 2-story building. It's zoned for 4. There are 5 units currently, both above and behind the restaurant. The developer is expanding the square footage, doubling it, adding 2 more floors because the building can allow for 4 stories, and keeping the same number of units. So we are essentially doubling our square footage in the heart of Teal Square and keeping 5 units, because guess what? 6 units equals more affordable housing. To make more our developers. We shouldn't stand for this when there's additional square footage, enough square footage for both units to house families, to house more affordable housing in the heart of Teal Square, and make sure our developers are including affordable housing. They are including units that are accessible, green space, and including units families. But we shouldn't have community meetings that impact the community with only 10 people in attendance. None of the tenants who are in any of those 5 units were at this community meeting, and none of them had a say in what happens. So not only are they going to be displaced as this building gets developed, but again, we're adding double the square footage in a building in the square.
Oh, thank you, Judy. Matt McLaughlin.
So I'm happy to say that I think we actually require a lot from developers in Somerville, and a lot of that was built into the zoning overhaul that we passed a few years ago. We have one of the highest inclusionary rates in the state, one of the highest linkage fees in the state. We have open space requirements, LEED Platinum requirements. I think we need to do more on fair labor practices, and I'd like to support more community benefits agreements. It's one of the reasons I voted against the Union Square zoning when that was proposed. At the end of the day, we need housing built, period. And I realized that after the 20% inclusionary housing fight, that some of my colleagues on the council supported it, not because they wanted to see housing get built, but because they thought it would slow the market down and hope that affordable housing wouldn't get built. And I know they believe that because they told me that. I mean what I say. I want this housing built. I'll take it at 20%. I'll take it at higher. I'll take whatever I can get. But nothing has been built thus far. I support high demands from the 1%, but I also don't want to support poison pills from people that fear change rather than build a future. Somerville is gentrified already. The city I live in is gone. We have failed in our mission to take care of the most needy people in the city. We need to build an affordable Somerville. We need to build a new Somerville.
Thank you, Matt. JT Scott.
All right, thanks. You know, every time we make a change to benefit people at the expense of profits, we are told in a resounding chorus from developers and small property owners alike that it is going to destroy the market and no one will ever come to Somerville again. We hear this over and over again with the 20% affordable housing, whereas we actually see now that that is creating more units in Somerville than in the prior 30 years of affordable housing requirements in Somerville. That's just a fact. I mean, that was presented in Finance Committee just in the past week. We heard about it when we passed the condo conversion ordinance in 2019. It was going to destroy the market and destroy everybody's property values. We heard about it. I can't tell you how many calls I got from people when we included LEED Platinum requirements for lab buildings who told me that they could not be built and we would never have a lab building in Somerville if we did it. I don't believe it. I don't believe it at all. And at this point, if somebody's going to come in and tell me it's going to crater property values in Somerville if we pass improvement X to protect tenants, fine. Do you promise? Because then we can actually get around to building housing for people that live here. Like Councilor McLaughlin said, building a new Somerville. And that Somerville has to have its top priority development without displacement. And that can only be done in partnership with strong independent neighborhood councils that are negotiating the community benefits agreement. I am happy to legislate anything that we can legally, and I've been in the weeds of what we can and can't do there. And for those things that we cannot legislate, we have to have power to the people to negotiate it and get.
Thank you, JT. And Ben Ewenkampen.
Thank you, and thank you to all to everyone for these answers so far. So I think one of the things that it's kind of easy to take for granted about Somerville is that we have this community that will come out to community meetings on a weeknight about a neighborhood development project and advocate for more affordable housing. It's like a bizarro world of the stereotype that you often hear about a bunch of NIMBYs coming out to a meeting and trying to block everything that's coming to their neighborhood. And it's really for that reason that I believe there is a huge value in the community process around development. Not that it always goes right, not that it always goes how I would ideally want things, but I have a lot of trust in this community that the things that they're going to advocate for, as Councilor McLaughlin said, are not poison pills. They're things to genuinely improve the projects. So I'll also say, I think in the world of kind of comparing ourselves in the real world to other municipalities, I honestly believe that the zoning that we passed in 2019 is a huge improvement about what we are getting out of developers. And I think that that is very real. The improvements we're getting around net zero housing, 20% inclusionary is not a change, but there were changes to how the inclusionary zoning works that bring them to smaller projects. The green score, continuing linkage fees, those are things that I really don't take for granted. But I do think that when it comes to individual projects, there is a lot to be gained from the community process. And that is one of the most important roles of the counselor, is to give leverage and support to community groups as they're pushing for the benefits of their specific neighborhood.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, our next topic is on charter reform. In the interest of time, this question is only for non-incumbents. And the question is, do you agree that the status quo structure of the city's charter concentrates too much power in the hands of the mayor? Please tell us as specifically as possible what changes you support making to Somerville's system of government through charter reform in the next term. First up will be Tessa Bridge.
Yeah, I thought it was me. I am really excited about the potential of charter reform, and I am hopeful that we're going to see a real opening in terms of shifting the balance of power in our city so that we can do a lot of the things that many of us are here fighting to be able to do. You know, it's no secret that Somerville is a very strong mayorally led city. And what that means is that the mayor's priorities go in a lot of cases. And we've seen that play out in a whole host of different policy areas. And one of my biggest things that I'm hoping is that power will be shared more between the city council and the mayor's office. So that would mean that the city council would have more influence over the budget to be able to make more line item changes as opposed to just vote up and down. I'd really like to see the city council have their own staff, particularly legal staff. I'd really like to see a change to the way that appointments are made to boards and commissions. We need to have rules that say that the mayor and the mayor's office have to get documents to the city council in a timely fashion so that we have time to review them and make thoughtful decisions and have thoughtful discussion. I'd really like for city councilors who are much closer to the experience of the people in their communities than the mayor is, and really understand the tensions and the needs going on in the wards to have a lot more power in decision making and to be able to form that checks and balances. And so all of these are things that we can do, which will help us to do things like oversee our police department, invest in affordable housing.
Thank you, Tessa. Next is Beatriz Gomez.
So, you know, I agree wholeheartedly. The mayor has a lot of power. Every time I went to talk to city councilors about change, they would tell me, I just don't have power. I want to be elected to be able to make a change. And we're also looking at a potential city council that will have the diversity that Somerville has never seen. I think for people like me to have a voice and to make a change, we need to put more power in city council. We need to have an independent solicitor to inform city councilors. The other thing is, working in Boston and Cambridge, I was always surprised of how little information our city councilors have. And it's because it wasn't given to them. They don't have the time. They need assistance. The issues in Somerville are big. We can't be part-timers anymore. We need to be informed to address development issues. If not, we're going to have sprawling development, bad decisions made. We definitely need a change. And I want to just say quickly, we need community committees that are elected. I worked on Maxwell Green, and I think it was a community of 10 there. And I think we made a really successful development because there was a lot of people from the community involved. So we need to advocate for neighborhood councils as well that represent our diversity.
Thank you, Beatrice. Next is Alex Anderson.
Thank you. So yeah, I agree with a lot that's being said. I think the power of the mayor is too strong in Somerville. I think the power of mayors generally is too strong across most cities in the country. And I think the power really needs to rely with the people, because a city council is always going to be more representative of the community than the mayor itself, because you have more people, more voices, more neighborhoods with direct representation. I think the city council should have a direct line item veto power if there is a majority of the city council that agrees a line item needs to be vetoed, that's a power the city council should have. And the mayor's office should have to work with making that veto happen and transferring those funds to other places so we can get the priorities we want working. I think there's a thing that I haven't heard in this conversation, which is about where the power of the mayor comes from. It also comes from City Hall and the mayor's office itself. In my 5 years working as an official member of the Somerville Bike Committee, I got to work directly with the city on street improvement projects. And it's not just the mayor's opinions that matter, it's also the opinions of career City Hall workers who run Department of Traffic and Parking, who run Department of Public Works, who have different perspectives on what the future of Somerville looks like, who aren't always necessarily willing to implement best practices, national standards, state standards. And so the city council also needs more power and oversight over the administrative body within the city. It's not just the mayor's policy positions and opinions, it's also the people who decide when and how work gets done in the city. And the city council needs to have a say on that process.
Thanks, Alex. Next up is Becca Miller.
Yeah, so I don't think it's a secret that we have a strong mayoral system, and I'd definitely be in favor of a charter reform process that rebalances that power to the city council. I think kind of a first step that I'd like to see us do is examine the hiring practices in the city to ensure that we're bringing in appropriately diverse hires across all city departments, representation on boards and commissions and other mechanisms to make sure that we are representing our full community. And I also think that we could increase the requirements for feedback from the community before ordinances are passed and enacted. I definitely think that, the council should have its own legal counsel and staff to render legal opinions and not rely on the administrations. The city council really needs to have staff, as has been said, to properly engage in constituent services, draft ordinances, and prepare for committee work. It's like this council's a really working body. I'd also like to see the city council have the power to increase items in the budget and for the city to implement participatory budget. I think more broadly, we could use this charter reform process to increase the role of civilian oversight and review of police so that it's truly accountable to our residents, and ensure adequate time for the city council to review proposals from the administration and for project labor agreements and community benefits agreements to be negotiated between the community and labor with developers. There's been previous few opportunities for residents and workers' voices to be heard. I think we could be creative and try and use this process to increase those opportunities.
Thanks, Becca. Next is Judy Neufeld.
Thanks. I think charter reform is one of the ways in which we can create a better balance of power in the city. I believe that people need to feel more connected and more engaged with their city government, not less. Charter reform should help ensure that the city council is a real partner with the mayor's office for originating the budget. City council should be actively engaged with creating the budget and proposing changes, not just cuts. Additionally, the city council should have a bigger role in the appointment process and be given real power to approve or reject appointments. Last, guaranteeing that the city council has access to legal counsel could speed up the process to implement action plans and ordinances in the city and just make the body more effective overall. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Judy. Our next topic is Inclusive Somerville. Following the murder of George Floyd, the call to defund the police has been supported by BIPOC-led organizations and coalitions, including Movement for Black Lives Matter, and Defund SPD. Recently, several incidents of violence and harm to BIPOC and LGBTQ community members have also been explicitly raised to the Somerville City Council. How have you reached out, engaged with, and supported BIPOC and LGBTQ community members who support defunding the police? We'll start with Lance Davis.
Okay, there we go. Thanks, Frank. Yeah, this is something that it's a challenge. It's because of all the reasons why that our power is limited that were just discussed in the last question. We have only so many tools in the toolbox, and I have been trying to work since I took office. I've been trying to work within that toolbox. I introduced revised and fought for the strongest welcoming community ordinance in the Commonwealth at the time, may still be. And I worked directly with the executive director of the Welcome Project on that, and with the ACLU. When the question of civilian oversight of policing came up, working with Councilor Scott and Councilor Ewan Campen, it was clear to us that our process is not it is not inclusive in the way that it needs to be. And we negotiated to hire the first ever city council staff, other than the clerk, both of whom were people of color. And what we learned from that is we still have so much further to go. So we need to make sure that this new Department of Racial and Social Justice is working quickly, but also in a way that doesn't reflect just the administration, reflects the community's needs and is taking in those voices. And I will work to make sure that that happens.
Thank you, Lance. Next is Alex Anderson.
Thanks. So this is, I think, the most important issue in terms of the experience of people of color, the experience of LGBTQ plus members of the community, the experience of people on low incomes. When I think of myself as a systems thinker, I understand that our systems were designed to protect men and to protect rich people and to protect white people. And the intersection of those three things is reflected in all of our systems. And so for the last 10 years, I have led the work of this within my organization, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. I founded our initial effort in terms of establishing racial equity, diversity, inclusion. In that process, I reviewed our hiring system. I recognized that our hiring system was perfectly designed to get the results that it gets, which was to have an organization that was global, yet was 92% white. I redesigned our hiring system, and today we are 65% white, 35% people of color, and continuing to improve. That matches the representation of the greater Boston community. I also have led our work towards equity. I don't think that representation is the end of the game, right? It's the beginning of the game, and actual equity, the ability to achieve your full potential is the rest of it. And so for the last 10 years, I have been bringing anti-racism work into my organization, fundamentally shifting the culture, our official values, what the work that we do. And I've led a team that was multiracial, multi-gender identities. And most importantly, in the last few years, I have stepped aside to make space for not my voice to be leading the work. I didn't fix the situation, I improved the situation, and made space for the diverse voices that came to the table.
Thanks, Alex. Becca Miller.
Yeah, so just to be clear, as a queer woman, I support defunding and reallocating funding into life-affirming programs. I've signed Defund SPD's petition and taken action last summer when we biked across the city to the mayor's house, and given public comment at recent city council meetings. And I'm a member of our Defund SPD ward organizing group. I've been really impressed with the people's budget process Defund SPD is currently planning and the deep outreach they're doing to engage everyone in the community. I have sought input from BIPOC and LGBTQ plus residents in developing my policy platform, and I'm working to translate my policy platform into multiple languages to reach more members of our community. We have in our script talking about reallocating funding, and we talk about it with everyone we reach on the doors. So we have, had similar experiences to other folks in this Zoom room where most folks are in favor of it, or if they have questions, we're able to talk through with the folks that we meet and are able to get them on board. Mostly my belief is that we need to bring more folks into the political process. That is especially true of folks who have been historically marginalized, and give them the skills and the resources they need to take action and empower themselves and make a better community. Our ward is pretty white, but we still have a lot of work to do to show up to support our BIPOC neighbors that are leaders of this movement and have been doing the work. Thank you.
Thanks, Becca. And Judy Neufeld.
Thanks. I'll share this issue isn't theoretical for me. I have lived experience with this growing up in Los Angeles in the 1980s. Loved ones in my life have been harassed by the police because of the color of their skin or because they were wearing the colors of a nearby gang. I've also had close loved ones who were in crisis, who had a cop show up at their door when what they needed in that moment was mental health services. So my lived experience guides me. And I believe the folks who have been most impacted by over-policing need to be brought into this conversation and not alienated from it. I spent last weekend knocking doors and talking to voters in the Clarendon Hill housing development, and we talked about policing. What I heard from the tenants is that they want a better relationship with the police. They want more accountability in the police force, and they want the right people to show up when called. We need to make sure that when folks are crisis, it's not just the police officer that shows up, but it's the right person who can help them in that crisis. I stand with these residents of Clarendon Hill. I believe we need to build winning coalitions and bring people into this fight to figure out how to divert resources away from the police budget into things that work, like deeper mental health services. I also want to share my gratitude for the Defund SPD presentation that showed the commitments the city has made around policing that we haven't followed through on. As city councilor, I'll bring my own lived experience to this issue and ensure that the commitments and promises we've made become a reality. Thanks.
Thank you, Judy. Next is Matt McLaughlin.
Thank you. Even before this became such an important issue in America, I always strive to listen to the most diverse groups and most underprivileged people in the community. I represent the most diverse ward in the city, and I reach out to people by knocking doors, by giving them phone calls, by going directly to people and asking them what they think. I don't feel like even now we're still listening to the people closest to the pain in Somerville. I don't think everyone in the Black Lives Matter movement or just Somerville necessarily supports defunding the police, or at least some of the more radical positions that have been taken. I think that's an assumption, and I think we need to listen to people. I'm not saying what anybody thinks. During the anti-racism training that the city council had that I had implemented, the instructors of that were kind of surprised by the position that people were taking on this. And a lot of the polling that we've seen right now have been done by mostly white, affluent college students. So when I went down to the Mystics with Jesse Klingon, people were angry at us because we wanted to abolish the housing authority police because we think that's excessive policing in the poorest neighborhood. And we were shocked to find that a lot of people were angry that we wanted to do that. So again, to say, don't believe me, don't listen to a word I say, listen to the people most affected by this. And I really want them to be at the front of this. If they decide that we should go in a certain direction, they should be the people we were listening to.
Thank you, Matt. Next is JT Scott.
I'll answer the question directly first, which is to say that I've been working with the people who are leading Defund SPD. I've been listening to them. I pick up the phone every time they call, and I've been really proud to be able to use my platform as the chair of the Finance Committee to invite these research teams from Defund SPD who have been doing incredible work, including the presentation on 20 years of broken promises and failed lip service towards reform, that we need to have service. We need to have that there. So I have been directly working with that because I believe in that community organizing. I also know that there is no monolithic voice of Black or brown or any other people in this community. And that's why the knocking on doors and going out and talking to people is so important. And, and I hear the stories and I hear that people want an alternative. People want to be able to handle their issues without calling the police. I mean, right now, inspectional services, ISD, actually answers about as many calls in a year as our police department does. And those kind of violations about health and safety in people's homes are ones that impact them just as much as, noisy kids in the park next door. So, this is, I got a call from a constituent saying, I see some kids in the neighborhood. I know they're getting into trouble. I see them doing drug deals. Who can I call for this that isn't the police? Because I don't want to get them involved. I want to have a better answer for him.
Thank you, JT. The next is Ben Ewenkampen.
As Councilor McLaughlin said, since I became involved in public service, I've tried to do everything that I can to listen to voices who don't kind of by default wind up in the room when the city council is discussing stuff. To the specific question of how I reached out to the defund movement, I've met multiple times with members of that group in various formats. Actually, last year during the budget season, we were receiving just hundreds and hundreds of emails about this. I made a point of sending responses to each one of them, which started a number of conversations. And I will say that one of the great challenges of this last year has been the inability to connect face-to-face with residents at a time like this has been particularly challenging. It's also, I think this has been mentioned by a few people, but my instinct as a human being throughout this is to shut up and to not have my voice be a privileged voice in this conversation. And yet I also feel a responsibility as an elected official who people expect to take action. So I've tried to balance the act of shutting up and the act of taking action on behalf of the voices that I've heard from the outreach that we do.
Thank you, Ben. Next is Jesse Klingon.
Thank you. So just to be specific on the question, as far as reaching out to BIPOC and LGBTQ members of the community who want to defund, in terms of my community of Ward 4, which, was who I represent, which is usually where my focus is in trying to listen, is that, there was very few people that we heard from that were specifically from Ward 4, and then even fewer people of color or otherwise. Willie Burnley Jr. actually was living in my ward at the time, and we had many conversations. But what I want to speak to is me as a counselor meeting people where they're at. So I have one of the most diverse last bastions of working class, working poor folks in the area, and when I go and I talk to people, all I hear is that they want to have a better relationship with the police, and not even necessarily Somerville police in general, because many people have said to me that they've had decent experience with the police, but they'd like to see more police in a more friendly manner. So I think it calls for, apparently the folks that I've talked to want a community policing approach, one where they don't feel this disconnect between them and the officers, and for the most part, that's what I've heard. From my particular community. So I pay very close attention. At the hearings last year, I look at those petitions and I look at the emails coming in.
Well, thank you, Jesse. Next is Tessa Bridge.
Yeah, so specifically to answer the question, I've been engaged with Defund SPD since its founding. I've signed petitions, I've spoken at city council, I've attended meetings with Defund SPD. One of the first groups that I reached out to when I decided to run was Defund SPD. I think they've done a phenomenal job at engaging a wide range of folks across our community in this work and really educating the public and elevating the important issue of public safety in our community. I've also worked in my professional life with communities of color for years. I've really sought input from BIPOC and queer folks in writing my policy platforms and in developing my identity as a candidate. And I really want to echo what I believe JT said, that the BIPOC community and the queer community are not monoliths. BIPOC and queer folks have a range of experiences and positions on issues like policing, and there are no shortcuts to finding out what our community wants and needs. So that's why I've been doing the work of knocking doors, talking to my neighbors so that I can best represent them on city council. And I think that we really need, as city councilors, to be thinking about how we can build more spaces to have meaningful conversations to move towards substantive change. We need to listen, bring people into the political process, and build inclusive spaces. So my background is in community engagement. This is work that I've done. I have a lot of ideas and strategies about how we can engage residents more in our processes. And then we have to act. So when we hear that we need a community process, which many of us here are saying, we have to take the steps to do that. And as a city, we have not done that. It's been a year since these calls started. We haven't had the commitment to that. And it's a real commitment of mine to get this community process we keep hearing about going so that we can really.
Thank you, Tessa. And next is Beatriz Gomez.
So I'm a person who likes to work the community, bring people together. And I think it's important that we bring all the most affected people and we have a conversation, bring everybody to the table. I think it's important. I understand why we talk about defunding the police. We wanted to bring attention to the horrible murders of violent deaths of men, women, and even children of color. And I need to speak as a parent. No mother should fear, or father or aunt or uncle should fear their child stepping out the door and fearing death for their child because of their color of the skin. We have to reverse this. We have to stop this discriminatory belief that brown and brown people are more prone to crime. Plain and simple. And we need to start that in our schools and not just the police. And I want to talk about Flavia's son, who has a police record right now. And it wasn't, I don't think the police are the wrong ones here. Someone in the schools sent this to the police. So I think we need to start, looking at our institutions and how we're permanently creating this process of discriminatory view of Black and brown prone to crime. We've got to stop this now.
Thank you, Beatrice. And now for our final question for each candidate. We're going to do something a little different. We've prepared a unique question for each of you that follows up on a specific aspect of your record or your written questionnaire submissions. We'll start in Ward 7, and the first question is for you, Alex. In your questionnaire responses, you talk about the need to achieve, quote, the right combination of progressive politics and practical solutions, end quote, to address the problems of your ward. Can you tell us a little more about the distinction you're drawing between progressive and practical? And can you tell us some instances in which you thought that progressive proposals were not practical?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. I think this is a great question. So let's just start with defund the police. It may be that we need to increase the police budget to get the results that we want to get better policing in our communities. If we want to increase social workers responding to social work needs in the community, that might require getting 15 social workers inside the police department next year. That might cost more money than we're currently spending on the police. So when I think about progressive ideas, I want to get the right type of policing in our community. I want to get the right services at the right time in the right place. But making a blanket statement like every year we're going to defund the police 10% without thinking about the implications is not a practical solution to the needs of our community. On a different issue in terms of transportation, when we think about things like progressive ideas, it's really easy to say, let's slap a bike lane or a bus lane on a street, but not think about the practical implications of what that means for people who live on that street, who might need access to parking. And so we have a lot of challenges in terms of design principles that we're allowed to use when it comes to improving our streets. And so when I think about practical solutions, I want to start from a conversation of what matters to the community. When we think about the 2019 in terms of the Powder House redesign, the public process for that was a mess because there wasn't community conversation. And so when I'm talking about practical ideas, we have to first start with what our values are, understand what our interests and assets are to get there, and then make the difficult decisions to make sure we're getting the most amount of good for the most amount of people as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, next question is for Becca Miller. The questionnaire responses from your two opponents in Ward 7 talk about making Somerville carbon neutral by 2050. By contrast, you said that the city should instead be targeting 2030 as the date for carbon neutrality. Accomplishing that will be very difficult. Specifically and concretely, how will you work with your colleagues to pursue this bold goal for climate justice as a city councilor?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I fully admit that this is a difficult goal to reach, right? But my educational background is in environmental science and policy. And frankly, we're on the path to 4 degrees Celsius of warming, which is pretty catastrophic. The Massachusetts State House passed a bill last year that leading advocates called baby steps that really didn't meet the urgency of the crisis. It can be tempting to hope that we can just leave it up to our federal officials to take action, but we're watching right now as the GOP stonewalls Biden's infrastructure bill. And who would we even lobby? Right? People like Markey, Warren, and Presley are all already leading on these issues. And it's up to us to push as hard as we can in Somerville to build a movement to lessen the difficulty of action at a higher level. So Somerville can and should lead. This is the future we deserve. And I think there's a couple ways that we could do that, right? So we could pursue a carbon tax on large developments that don't meet our requirements. We could look into maintaining and protecting our tree canopy. We could really work on decarbonizing our municipal buildings with the money that's coming back to the city from the Green Line extension and through ARPA. We just need to be creative, right? We have a significantly older housing stock that we need to work on to decarbonize and weatherize. I think just being aggressive as we can be is something that we deserve for the future that our children will live through. And I'm really excited to work on those with y'all.
Thanks, Becca. So the next question is for Judy Neufeld. In your questionnaire, you refused to commit to cut the police budget by 10% in each year of the next term, a demand that has been put forth by community organizers, over 4,000 residents, and BIPOC-led groups like Defund SPD. A study conducted by the city itself in 2001 shows that the city, that's Somerville, made recommendations that would reduce patrol staffing today by at least 23 officers. This alone would reduce the police budget by $2 million, which is easily more than 10% of any police budget the mayor has ever proposed. Because the city council cannot affirmatively allocate funds, it is important for city councilors to take public positions like this in order to force the mayoral administration to plan in advance for the necessary reallocation to other forms of community support and well-being. Will you make a commitment to our members tonight that you will cut a minimum of 10% from the SPD budget in each year of the next term? Why or why not?
Thanks so much for that question. As I mentioned before, this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart, and I have some lived experience with. Like I said before, the way I will lead as city councilor is to center the voices of those most impacted. And in the conversations I'm having with voters, both across the ward and specifically the voters of color, our immigrant voters, folks that live at Clarendon Hill and Clarendon Towers, is that the messaging around police abolishment is not what they're looking for. Cutting a minimum of 10% from the SPD budget each year leads eventually to a full abolishment, and I'm not in support of that. However, I am in support of reallocation and making sure that we're investing in community services that allow for healthier communities, like mental health services, community wellness services, the crisis of mental health coming out of this not prepared for as a city. And we don't have enough social workers and multilingual community health workers on staff in the city to make that happen and to support folks in what they need coming out of the pandemic. I am going to commit to making sure we look systemically at the challenges with our police budget and allocate resources to the areas in the city which deepen our health and wellness and our mental health services. And that's the commitment I'm willing to make.
Okay, thank you, Judy. The next question is for Matt McLaughlin. In your questionnaire, you stated, in quotes, "I do not have strong opinions on the BDS movement," end quote, and refuse to answer questions pertaining to this issue or ending Somerville's contracts with corporations complicit in the Israeli occupation of Palestine. Since submitting your questionnaire, Israel's 11-day bombardment of Gaza killed over 250 Palestinians, including 66 children, and wounded more than 1,900 people. The assault targeted doctors, damaging 18 hospitals and media organizations, including the Associated Press and Al Jazeera. Human Rights Watch called Israel guilty of apartheid. Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, or BDS, is a Palestinian-led nonviolent movement for freedom, using the same tactics that were critical to ending the South African apartheid. You stated that your focus is on improving the lives of people in Somerville. As a city councilor, one often takes positions on issues that aren't directly within your governmental authority, including supporting picket lines and issues at the state, federal, and international level. The question is, has your position on this evolved? And what do you say to Palestinian residents and residents of Somerville directly or indirectly impacted by this crisis?
Well, I'd first like to say that I didn't not answer that question. I noticed several people left it blank, and I gave my opinion, which is I focus on the people of Somerville, and I maintain that position. I am pretty knowledgeable, not an expert, but very knowledgeable on Middle East foreign policy and the Israeli-Palestine conflict. I can't answer that question in 90 seconds. All I can say is when I was younger and was involved in more international and national politics, I was involved in the anti-globalization movement, very involved in national politics. I never felt fulfilled by that. And what's really made me feel fulfilled is focusing on the ground level, focusing on the ward, focusing on the people that I can have direct impact on. You want to give me, I can't really say anything about BDS because I don't know what contracts we have. I don't know what impacts divesting from them will have. I sincerely don't know. And if people want to look, and I also would say, if you look at the divest from fossil fuels movement, we had some hangups there where the city council is very limited in what we can do. I focus on the power that I have, my power to help people in this community. And if you're asking me, what do I say to Palestinian people? It's like, you have my heart. I feel you. I served in the Middle East. I've seen the destruction of imperialist governments like our own. And my heart is with you, but my head and work is with the people of Somerville. And I gladly talk more about this with anyone else.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, the next question is for JT Scott. Both your questionnaire responses and your voting record over the last 2 terms are broadly in line with our Revolution Somerville's values and priorities. However, on issues where your colleagues don't already agree with you, how do you approach persuasion and coalition building to make sure that our shared values are actually implemented in city policy?
I love these questions, by the way. And ultimately, when it comes to my colleagues right now in the city council, one thing that I've found rewarding is how willing they are to actually look at hard data. And that's why so much of what takes my time away from, honestly, talking to people on doors is that takes an enormous amount of time to file the Freedom of Information requests, to do the investigations in the state law, to build the case that we need to justify to colleagues that don't naturally come from the same background, making a hard vote in favor of something that supports our shared values and our Revolution Somerville's values. Sometimes I get there, and there's been some big wins. Sometimes I haven't. So it's something that I think, I have a database-driven approach to it. I try to convince people on the merits and the facts. I know other people have other ways too, but ultimately, the most convincing case always comes from the people, always comes from the movement. And when the people of Somerville speak together, that's when politicians listen more than any other time. I can be the tip of the spear. I can make space for those community voices to be heard. But ultimately, my colleagues, while they might be persuaded by my facts sometimes and not persuaded by my facts other times, they always have to listen to the voice of people.
Thank you, JT. And the next question is for Ben Ewenkampen. In your questionnaire, you refused to commit to cut the police budget by 10% in each year of the next term, a demand that has been put forth by community organizers, over 4,000 residents, and BIPOC-led groups like Defund SPD. A study conducted by the city itself in 2001 shows that the city made recommendations that would reduce patrol staffing today by at least 23 officers. This alone would reduce the police budget by $2 million, which is easily more than 10% of any police budget the mayor has ever proposed. Because the city council cannot affirmatively allocate funds, it is important for city councilors to take public positions like this in order to force the mayoral administration to plan in advance for the necessary reallocation to other forms of community support and well-being. Will you make a commitment to our members tonight that you will cut a minimum of 10% from the SPD budget in each year of the next term? Why or why not?
So first of all, I want to thank everyone in the community that has made this a question that is being asked of candidates this year. I think it is incredibly valuable for the community that there is a clear issue that is being asked, candidates are taking positions on it, and the public gets to choose. So I'll say, I did vote last year in support of a cut that would have ultimately been above 10%, and we haven't voted this year, and I plan to support some sizable cuts. my approach to the police budget, it doesn't really come down to just saying I'm going to cut 10% a year. It comes down to how are we moving things that I don't want the police to be handling out of the police department. So I'll just give an example. I personally don't believe the traffic enforcement should be done by the police department. I believe that many people in this community don't think that, and I would like to see that happen. That's, in fact, would be way more than 10% if we were to successfully have a city council and a mayor take the necessary steps to move traffic enforcement out of the police department. That would be a major shift, way over 10%, that I would very strongly support. And I would support similar shifts for other roles that I prefer to not be in the police department. It's just not the way that I approach this. And I think it's important that I'm honest with the public, that I'm not going to be approaching this as just 10% every year. I'm going for specific asks.
Thank you, Ben. The next question is for Jesse Klingen. You were the only Ward City Council candidate seeking our endorsement who said that you didn't support allowing non-police to take over traffic work, and one of only 3 non-recused ward candidates, along with Alex and Beatrice, who didn't support capping overtime earnings of police officers at 10% of their salary. What justification is there in your mind not to support these reforms?
So number one, I would say I've seen what happened. Like, so even with crossing guards, I don't think that people have, the people out there that are driving around are pretty nasty. And I'm pretty sure that they don't respect the crossing guards. They don't respect anybody that doesn't have any authority, like any powerful authority. So I think that, we've seen what happens, PCOs get hot coffee thrown in their face. I mean, these things, at least this is the way I view the world, is that, essentially, oftentimes what we see is that, like I've seen it at the corner of Broadway and McGrath when they put a cop out there, and essentially the people just drove right at the cop or past the cop. And this was an actual cop. So I don't know that it would work. I don't know that, I think it would put people in danger. I also think as far as the overtime, until we figure out what the right number of police until we have like the right amount of staff, we can't say that we would not fund the overtime, because essentially it's still going to happen. Overtime is still going to happen, especially when we're when we cut the police budget, basically then we can't say how it's going to be cut. So we'll cut it, and then they'll enact that in the way they want to. So ultimately, what you have is then you have people, you have officers being, forced onto overtime, and we have an obligation to pay that. So.
Oh, thank you, Jesse. Our next question is for Tessa Bridge. Almost all candidates running for elected office make promises for proactive outreach to constituents and increased inclusivity and engagement, particularly with constituents whose voices are historically not included in local government, as you did in your questionnaire. But actually following through on these commitments is difficult, since most councilors have full-time jobs in addition to their responsibilities on the council. In your questionnaire, you speak of doing regular constituent canvassing. Realistically, what specific concrete steps are you committing to taking regarding ongoing constituent outreach if elected?
This is an awesome question. Thank you for asking it of me. I think this is like potentially the most important question that any of us could be asked, because at the end of the day, we're here to represent the people we serve. And if we don't know what they need and want, then what good are we? So I really appreciate you all centering engagement and inclusion in this. And I'd like to begin by just sharing my definition of what inclusion means, which is to create spaces that are designed to reflect and support everyone across intersectional identities, experiences, and needs. And so that's the lens that I'm always going to bring to this work. And so we have to do that in our policy spaces by making policies that are cross-cutting and how folks are going to experience them. We also need to make sure that we're thinking about the way we're structuring our meetings so that we are supporting more folks and lowering barriers to attend meetings, which is something that I have a lot of experience around, providing childcare, food, translation, considering times, really doing all we can to get people into those sort of more formal spaces, and then really doing the sort of legwork. So canvassing is one way to do that. And I'm showing I'm going to do that. By the way, I'm doing it in my campaign and I'm going to keep that up. We also need to make sure that we're going to where people are, places of worships, community groups, schools, wherever we can reach people in spaces they feel comfortable, and really listen deeply and build those inclusive spaces. And then, as I said before, act. People are going to turn up more when they feel like their input makes a difference. And so we have to listen, and then we have to act, and then we have to go back and say, how did that land for you? And we did that thing that we talked about, and do this as a circular process to make sure we are bringing more and more people.
Thank you, Tessa. And the next question is for Beatrice. You're the only candidate seeking our endorsement in a contested ward race who does not have an issues page on their website. In your questionnaire, you call for the need to further assess or be better informed on issues before taking a position. But many of these issues we asked about are ones which the city and the public, including many community groups in Somerville, have been studying and working on for years. Examples include cutting the police budget and banning exchanges between the SPD and foreign militaries, the remediation and renovation of Conway Park, addressing homelessness, the decriminalization of drugs, and establishment of safe consumption sites. Why should our members and the Somerville voters elect you if you are unwilling to take clear positions in advance on important long-standing issues where data and experience has been developed over years and is already well known to the public?
Well, one of the reasons I don't have an issues page, I have spent the past months working with the Latino community, taking them out of the difficulties they went through COVID and realizing all the injustices we have in our city. I've been working with Padres Latinos. I was at a church on Sunday, handing out flyers for an event we have tomorrow. I have been signing up, helping our Latino parents sign up for after school programs and for signing up for summer programs as a relief for COVID. I'm happy to say that yesterday we found some summer programs for a mom who was recently out of homelessness. So that is why. It's not that I haven't been inactive, it's that my priority is to provide help to the Latino community. And I'm a boots on the ground gal. I'm not messing around. My boots are on the ground right now. I will put my issues page, and these are things I've researched because of who I am. I am a Puerto Rican woman. I belong to a colony of the United States. Issues are at the core and the heart of me. I live this. I just want to say I'm an active person, and I feel very offended that you just said I don't have any research issues. I don't know issues. Also, if you have been looking at my Facebook page and you're looking at my Twitter accounts, I am constantly posting about issues, including the fact of someone who got run over on Thursday in one of our streets where he was bloody. I'm trying to bring attention of the issues of traffic safety. I am there and all the time.
Thank you, Beatrice. And our final question is for Lance Davis. Tufts University is partially in your ward, and pilot negotiations have been going on for years.
Yes.
Given Somerville's budgetary needs across many departments, what have you done and what will you do to push for a more equitable pilot from Tufts University? And pilot stands for payment in lieu of taxes.
So that's an excellent question, and it is an ongoing problem, both up in the west end of the city and in the east end. I think we all shared the frustration and disappointment and anger, frankly, when the partners building was bought and leased back so that they weren't paying any taxes on that building, for which we had been promised commercial tax revenue for a lot of years. Tufts is a similar situation. This is a institution that benefits greatly from being where they are. We share some benefit as well. But I have had frequent conversations directly with representatives of Tufts over the years, for a number of different reasons. But every time I am on the phone with them or in a meeting with them, I bring up in one way or another the fact that we need deeper cooperation. We need an institutional master plan. We need a firmer commitment to an equitable pilot payment. As most of you all know, the payments that Tufts makes to Boston, to Somerville, Medford, is not on the same par as what even they make to cities like Boston, let alone what other institutions make. So it is an ongoing challenge. I've supported the formation of an ordinance, a pilot ordinance that Councilor McLaughlin introduced. We passed that recently, and we'll continue that work and try and get them to pay their fair share.
Thank you, Lance. And that's our final question of the evening. Thanks to all the candidates for joining us tonight. And thanks to everyone watching for your engagement with the important issues that face our city. As a reminder, folks can find each of these candidates' questionnaire responses on the endorsements and elections section of our website, ourrevolutionsomerville.org, all one word, ourrevolutionsomerville.org. Our fourth and final forum will be held this Sunday night at 7 p.m. with candidates seeking Our Revolution Somerville's endorsement in their run for mayor. Until then, good night